It is Lions week on Chris and Company. Look around at how lucky we are to be alive right now because the Detroit Lions have Super Bowl aspirations. And we have a phenomenal guest lined up for today's show. That is Dan Miller, play-by-play guy for the Detroit Lions, a guy who has seen it all. I mean, he looks really darn good for someone who has seen some really bad football, some really stressful football. I brought it up with Anthony, how he had to go through, 8 years of the Harbaugh circus with very few gray hairs. I mean, you look at the product I'm rocking right now, that is clearly a result of a Tigers team that hasn't made the playoffs in 10 years. Dan looked great. He sounded great. I can't wait for you guys to listen to that interview. But before we get to it, we got to get some things out of the way. If you're watching this on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, share this with your friends. If you enjoy this product, let people know. Like, here's the thing. I'll be totally honest with you guys. I believe in the product. I like the content that I put out. Growing the product, I got to work on, and I'm going to need some help with that. So if you guys are enjoying this show, which it seems like you are, and I really appreciate all the positive feedback, make sure to spread the word as we continue to kind of climb the ladder here and expand, not just with Chris and Company content, but with Chris Castellani content in general. You can listen to this show in audio form on Apple Podcasts. You can listen to it in audio form on Spotify. Let's see. Is there anything else? Nothing right now. We can save it all for the end. So let's jump right into it because I am really excited for you guys to listen to this interview for what is the most anticipated Detroit Lions season of our lifetimes. So a lot to look forward to, and nobody else who I'd rather talk to than Dan Miller. Let's get right to the interview with him. Chris and Company rolls on with another very special episode. We are, it's kickoff week officially for the Detroit Lions. And what I think is fair to say, at least in my lifetime, the most anticipated season in Detroit Lions history. A lot to look forward to. And there's nobody else I'd rather have on the show right now than Detroit Lions radio play-by-play man. You might be so humble, but I would say local legend. Man, we take our broadcasters very seriously here in Detroit, and obviously you do a wonderful job. Dan Miller joins the program today. Dan, thank you so much for joining.
I appreciate the kind words, Chris. Thank you very much. It's great to be here, and I appreciate you having me.
Of course, and obviously, look, kickoff's coming right up. I before every season, it's kickoff time for the players, kickoff time for the coaches, but it is for the broadcasters as well. Do you feel with this season having the expectations that it has? Do you get nervous coming into a campaign?
Well, yeah, I think the thing is, in particular, this one, it's a little bit daunting in that everything that you did last year is gone. And you have to start all over from ground zero. And that's where everybody is. But I think that's kind of the one thing that hit me was flying back from San Francisco last year was, man, you got this far. Then next year you're going to start and you got to do it all again, as well as you played, all the breaks that you got, the plays that you made late in games to win, all those things. So I think that's probably the biggest feeling. But listen, this is what these guys do for a living. It's one of the most amazing things I think that I've seen and grown to know is their life is really, during the regular season, 17 one-week lifetimes. That's all they have is the team that's in front of them. So they don't get caught up in big picture things, whereas I think we might sometimes. But look, it's an exciting season that's full of huge possibilities, great expectations, and now it's all about going out there and doing it.
Absolutely. And I'm gonna this show will be loaded full of Lions questions, but there are a few just Dan Miller questions that I wanted to, based on the research I was doing, I wanted to ask you. If the internet is correct, which, I mean, roll the dice. Sometimes it is
50-50.
You're being generous there. I was looking in your background a little bit, obviously, from Washington, D.C., former season ticket holder for Washington back when they were the Redskins. And I saw that you and your father used to attend games, but at the time he didn't know how to keep score. Is that true?
He wasn't a big sports fan, and I think he just was more than willing to do anything to kind of feed the beast that I had, which was just a love of sports. So he would take me to Bullets games or Caps games or Redskin games. We didn't have a baseball team, so he'd take me to Orioles games in Baltimore. Wasn't really an Orioles fan, but that was the closest team. So, I'm greatly appreciative of him for doing that. And I think the scoring thing is in reference to the fact that he used to, parents would volunteer in Little League to keep the book in basketball or baseball or whatever. And he really didn't know a lot about it, but he was good with math. So he figured out a way to do that. But, I wouldn't be where I am if it wasn't for him, doing some things that probably weren't at the top of his list in terms of going to games, but he would take me. And that really is what, fed the passion that I have.
It's a fascinating thing because I associate you, and so many people associate you as being, you are the Lions broadcaster, you are a Detroit guy, and yet there are so many broadcasters that got their start or grew up in previous cities. Ernie Harwell's like that as well. Was there a point when after you became a part of Detroit media, where you felt like, I feel like I might be a lifer here. I feel like I'm kind of here to stay.
Yeah, it's a great question. And the honest answer is when I came here in 1997, I thought I'd be here for 2 years and then I'd go back home. Because I think when you grow up, you kind of always envision yourself doing it in the place that you are. You envision yourself doing it at home and following in the footsteps of these sportscasters that I grew up watching. I saw myself on Channel 9 in Washington, D.C. I worked at Channel 7 and Channel 5 in D.C. So I really thought when I came here that I would ultimately go back. And very quickly, our children were very young when we moved here. This became home for them. This became home for my wife and I. The people at Fox 2 treated us unbelievably well. The Lions, I did 5 years of NFL on Fox. That was something that was tied to my being in Detroit and being a member of, a Fox station. And then the Lions thing came along. So I don't know when the moment was, but it didn't take long to realize that this is where we wanted to be. It was a great place to live. Our kids loved it. Our kids made friends. I made great friends and worked with great people here. So, I think in this business, number one, you always go where the job is. We don't choose necessarily where we work in this business. But I think I've also grown to understand that you need to respect what you have. Because if you're constantly looking for the next thing, or you're constantly thinking that the grass is greener on the other side, more often than not, you're probably going to end up wrong at some point. And I really knew I had an amazing situation here with people that treated me well, and I was not going to give that up. And we did have opportunities to go back, and it never made sense. And it really was never anything that we thought significantly about, because I've been here 27 years now. And for many, many, many of those years, this is home and this is what we believed we were doing.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Like I said, so many people associate you with Detroit at this point. I think, you see it with broadcasters, you see it with athletes, where I think there is, there's a toughness with that, because you are so indoctrinated into one area and being a fan of a team in a certain area, that it's you're growing back into kind of a second community. But obviously, over time, you've done a marvelous job of that. Let's talk a little bit about the Lions, the highly anticipated upcoming season for Detroit. Look, it's year 4 under Brad Holmes, year 4 under Dan Campbell, and to me, this has been as flawlessly executed a rebuild as you're going to get in the NFL, considering the steps that Holmes has taken, who he's gotten in the draft. As someone who's been here for a long time, are you surprised at how quickly this thing got turned around?
It's hard to say. I don't know that you ever really know how long it's going to take. Mm-hmm. I will say this, their hit rate has been pretty incredible, and that's what's gotten them to the point that they are right now. There's no doubt about that. His ability to draft players, Chris, it's a couple things. It's your ability to draft players, and then it's your ability to develop them. Yeah. And I frankly think there's probably a lot of times in the past where the Lions drafted players that could have been good in the NFL. They just didn't develop them. And for so long, we didn't even see guys get second contracts. So I think that I give so much credit to Brad Holmes and his staff for selecting the players. But man, what Dan Campbell and his staff have done in terms of bringing those players in, teaching them what it is to play in the NFL, has been just as important, because these guys don't come in understanding what it takes to be in this league, what it takes to perform in this league, what it takes to be a Lion. And they've set the tone for what that means, and they've set the parameters for what that means. It's what the good teams do. It's what Baltimore has done for years. It's what Pittsburgh has done for years, the consistency that they've had. They know what a Raven looks like. They know what a Steeler looks like. And now you know what a Lion looks like. And that's because of what Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell have done in terms of defining this organization and what they expect out of the players that they pick.
Player development is something that I talk about all the time as a Tiger fan, of guys coming up through the minor leagues, and it's very similar. But I think that, the same can obviously be said in the NFL. And I think that one of the biggest mistakes that organizations will make is that they can make the assumption that the player who they acquire in the draft is close to a finished product, and it's not even close. There's so many steps that you have to learn, from year 1 to year 2 to year 3, where, a guy could have a really solid rookie season and then fall off just because they, continually going back to the grind and continually going back to the well is something that's got to be taught over time. And I think you're absolutely right, because similar, I think you look at a lot of the teams in this state, whether it's the Tigers or the Lions, I think that the mistake they made wasn't getting guys who weren't talented. They got a lot of talent. It was, are you developing that talent on a year-to-year basis into legitimate players? And I think what Holmes and Campbell have been able to do is masterful. It seemed like a moment where, for a lot of people, where the corner was kind of turned, was the win in Green Bay at the end of the 2022 season. Obviously, the team just missed the postseason, but that was a nationally televised game. They were playing for an opportunity to knock Green Bay out of the playoffs, which was an opportunity they took up, and that made a lot of people very happy, including myself. Do you feel, was that the moment to you where you kind of got the impression, I feel like this is working? Or was there something that came earlier, maybe even later?
Yeah, there were so many incredible moments, I think, in that season. You're 1-5, and Sheila Hamp picks that moment to come out and double down on Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes, which was like, wow. That was gutsy. And that was something that I didn't know, frankly, as I walked away from that moment of her addressing the press. I was like, wow, I hope this is right, because we hadn't seen the results yet. We hadn't seen the victories yet. And all of a sudden they go out and lose the next week. Then they win 8 out of 10 to close that season. And all of a sudden you're saying, you know what, there's something happening here. Players are developing, they're winning, they're capable. And then, yeah, no doubt that win in Green Bay, we all sat there. It was a Sunday night game. We watched the games unfold with the Rams playing before them, trying to figure out whether or not they were going to have a chance to get into the playoffs with a win. And it was deflating. They were playing that game up in the stadium in Green Bay on the big screen, and we're watching it. And there were a couple of really, really questionable calls. So you're disappointed, you're deflated. And then all of a sudden they're coming out to play the Packers and Aaron Rodgers, who have a chance to get into the playoffs with a win. And you're thinking, probably not a great recipe here. A team that's, had their playoff hopes ripped from them, and you're going up against a Hall of Fame quarterback who smells blood in the water with a chance to go in there and earn a playoff berth. And they come out, outplay them, beat them. And that really was kind of a wow moment and a great way to end the season. And I think a tone setter for these guys as to what they were capable of. Look, I think they already had a hint. They'd won 7-9 coming into that point. But to do that in that circumstance with that guy across the field was a big moment, I think, for everybody in the organization. No doubt about it.
I think that one hit different, too, because it was a movie that we'd seen play out a million times. And we thought that we knew the ending. And it didn't end with Rodgers breaking their hearts. It didn't end with Green Bay, kind of waltzing into the postseason. I think, tone setter is kind of the perfect way to describe it. That was fun and made all the more fun by what came next. Like, they lived up to the expectations the next season. Dan, you've been around here for quite a while. You've seen a lot of Lions coaches. You've seen a lot of Lions GMs. You've seen many different regimes. Why has this one worked where maybe some other ones have not?
Chris, I'll go back further than even talking about Holmes and Campbell, and go back to when Sheila Hamp decided to fire Matt Patricia and Bob Quinn, and she brought in Chris Spielman. And this was before the season even ended.
Yeah.
And Before they went out and hired a general manager and a head coach, they decided we need to define this organization. And she went around and talked to people in the organization and found out it was fractured. It was broken in a lot of ways. There were a lot of people that did not feel valued. The previous regime had basically had if you're in football, you matter. If you're not, you don't type of attitude. And the building was basically cut in half. You're allowed to go here. You're not allowed to go here. It was not a good place to work. And she knew she needed to change that. She needed to do something where everybody was valued, where everybody, whether you're community relations, public relations, media relations, sales, game day, whatever it is, working at Ford Field, working in Allen Park, you needed to feel like you were a part of winning and losing. And that was before she did anything else. And I think that was so smart because she could have just gone out and hired a general manager. She could have just gone out and hired a head coach, and people would have said, "Oh, that's a good up and coming GM, or that's an accomplished GM, and that's a good up and coming head coach, or somebody that's already done it." But she didn't do that. Before she did it, she decided, what are the Detroit Lions going to be? Who are we? How do we want to conduct ourselves? How do we want to run our business? And they set that, and then they went out and found guys in Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes that fit into that model. And they've been perfect fits for what they want to do. And the organization now, forget winning, just in terms of how they conduct their business, the way that people feel going to work every day is better than it has been in my 27 years of covering that team. And so I credit her. And then you bring in people that in Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell that have a vision, that understand where they want to go, and they don't bend. They're unwavering. They stick to what they want to do. They were going to tear this thing down to the studs. They were going to build it up with players that they drafted. They weren't going to go out and go for quick fixes and sign a bunch of free agents from other teams that, you see teams do that. And it's like, oh my gosh, look at that team. They went out and signed 6 big free agents, and 2 years later, they're cutting them because they have cap problems and they're not winning. They did it the right way. They built from within, and they stuck to their vision, and all the while did it, I think, the appropriate way of conducting yourself as an organization on the field and off. So I think everything is kind of falling into place. Chris, I'll have people, from other cities that'll say to me, how'd they do it? How'd the Lions hire the right people and let them do their jobs? And that's what the Lions have done.
And I think the word that comes to mind is culture, because I think culture is the most important, but also most abstract word in sports, because it's one of those things you can't really, it's hard to define a good culture, but when it's there, when you see, like, when you feel like things are clicking. And you kind of already alluded to it with your last answer, but I guess just on the day-to-day, what have you noticed in terms of changes in culture over the last several years?
Well, I think what you just said is important because it's a word that we use a lot.
Yes.
But I think sometimes we find out we just use it and it doesn't necessarily apply and it doesn't necessarily mean anything. But then when you see it, you're like, okay, I get it. I understand it. And that's I think what you see with what they're doing with the Lions. I would say this, what I see on a day-to-day basis is 2 people, 3 people, including Mike Disner, Rod Wood, Ray Agnew, guys that are at the top of this organization, from Sheila to Rod to Disner to on down to Dan Campbell and guys that have put this organization, pointing it in a direction and not change that. And then they live it every day. People go there, want to work there. They're invested there. They feel like they're part of things there. And it's just it's a positive place to be right now. And that just wasn't always the case. So to me, that's the culture. The culture is you see everybody pulling in the same direction and everybody feeling like they're part of it. And I think that's important. And I just don't think you can overstate the difference between feeling like an organization is broken or fractured or just has a bunch of unhappy people there that don't want to go to work, and an organization where everybody feels that they are part of the product and an important piece, that what they're doing matters to the overall success or failure of the organization. Even if they don't coach or play left tackle or something along those lines, they're still important.
And I think so much of it stems from just the positive mindset that Dan Campbell brings to the organization as the head coach. And it was really interesting because I think Campbell is one of the few coaches in sports where I feel like he is the face of the franchise in a lot of ways. Now, there's some great players here, and he might not want that. But when I talk about the Lions with people, even before this run of success, I mean, he was, from the opening press conference, he was kind of a household name. Like people, he connected with people pretty early on, but he was not a hot commodity necessarily when he was hired. Were you surprised by when he was named the head coach?
Yeah, I had no reason to believe that somebody who wasn't a coordinator was going to be the head coach of the Lions. That wasn't a former head coach. He'd been an interim head coach in Miami. Wasn't a coordinator. He was off the radar for me. There's no doubt about that. But I'm glad you said that about his opening press conference, because I do and have done so many of these. People open up the black book. I need to talk to somebody about the NFL. Here's a play-by-play guy. I'll call him, get him on. So you go on, and for the first 2 years, every show I went on was about biting kneecaps. And it just drove me nuts, because that was a 90-minute press conference. Yeah. And I'm on a text thread with some other media guys, some of whom are really hard to please. And after that was over, I had a conversation with a couple of them, and it was like, we've seen a lot of opening press conferences here between the Tigers, the Red Wings, the Pistons, and the Lions. That was the best one I'd seen. He set the tone perfectly for the players that were listening, the fans that were listening, the members of the organization that were listening. He said, here's our vision. Here's what it's going to take. It's not going to be easy, but here's how we're going to do it. And it was perfect. And it just drove me nuts that around the country, and I understand why, we all play sound bites that are funny and laugh about them and joke about them and stuff like that. But it so defined him that I'm happy now that while that is still part of who he is, that people see everything else that goes on with Dan Campbell. I think Hard Knocks was a big part of that.
I agree.
That people got to see that this was not just some big meathead who's talking about biting kneecaps. This is a dude who's pretty smart, understands football, great motivator, cares about his players, guys want to play for him, and checks every box you need to check to be a heck of a coach, a heck of a leader, and a heck of a motivator. And but it just threw me when you mentioned opening press conference, because it's been for me just kind of a source of frustration that's what so many people took out of it. But yet I always challenge them, find it on YouTube, go back and watch it, then tell me you're not fired up when it's over. And it's got nothing to do with biting kneecaps. Although, to be honest with you, that was a perfect explanation of what this team ultimately became. Yeah. They are a team that you can knock down, and they're going to bite a kneecap on the way up, and you can knock them down again, and they're going to take another chunk out of the. That's exactly, jokes aside, that's who they are. That's who they've proven to be. And he's the one who has really put them in that position. He's the one who has brought about that attitude for this team.
It's important to set a tone in an opening press conference, but opening press conferences are way cooler if they age well, which I feel like is what's happened with is you go back and watch it now. It's like, yeah, this is the identity of the team.
They're also hard to lose. I mean, if you lose your opening press conference, that's not great. I mean, there have been some here that it was like, oh, I don't know about this. But I mean, you should have people. I've fallen in love at a lot of opening press conferences and thought this dude's going to be good. But I think what you said is right. If it ages well, if you can go back and look at it and say, man, he told us exactly what he's going to do, and then he went and did it.
It's a hard bag to fumble. You are correct about that. And you brought up Hard Knocks and the fact that I feel like over the last several years we've seen a different side of the Lions and a different side of Dan Campbell. But as somebody who is, you see him all over TV, you see him on merch. What are some things about him as a head football coach that you think people get wrong? Like, what do you think are some misconceptions maybe about him?
I think the fourth down thing is obviously debatable, that people can decide what they want to do. But I think sometimes people forget that his attitude towards risk is one that has also allowed this team to be successful. The playoff game against the Rams, throwing on first down with 2 minutes to go. A lot of coaches would have just run it They have a great offensive line. Try to get the first down, let the Rams burn their timeouts and, try to win the game that way. But he said, you know what? I trust Jared Goff. I trust Amon-Ra. I trust my line to protect him. We're going to throw the ball. First down. People also forget Rams game, 4th down, red zone, touchdown. Bucks game, 4th down, red zone, touchdown. Go back to that Green Bay game, throwing the ball late, first down to set that up. There have been a lot of times where his 4th down gambles or throwing the ball when maybe other people didn't think that they would have certainly helped this team. So I had somebody say to me, I forget that they've been talking about Jake Bates and maybe kickers in general, but said, if they get a better kicker, do you think he'll be smarter on 4th down? And I said, well, inherent in your question is the belief that I don't think he's smart. Now, I don't agree with every one of his calls, but they're thought out.
Yeah.
He's thought about what he's doing, and he's putting the ball in the hands of the unit on this team that he trusts the most. And that's Jared Goff, that offensive line, and Ben Johnson and Amon-Ra and that offense as a whole. And I will tell you this, go back to the first year, Minnesota game. He had a 3rd down. He did not, he had a 4th down, I think in 4 from like the 36-yard line and didn't go for it. Missed the field goal. Minnesota took the ball, went down and won the game. And he said afterwards, if I had to do it over again, basically I would throw the ball. And I think that molded him to trust that unit when he has the opportunity to do it. That game, I think, was a big moment for him where he played it conservative and didn't work out. Now, look, there's calls I disagree with in the Dallas game when they got knocked back after the penalty. I'd have kicked the extra point.
Me too.
But I just think sometimes you need a big picture look at what he does. You're not always going to agree with it. It's not always going to work. But, man, I think there have been a lot of times that he doesn't get credit where some of his decisions probably went against the grain, and people forget about those and just want to talk about the bad ones.
I think
or ones that don't work out. I shouldn't say bad ones.
Right, which I think is just kind of the inherent nature of sports,
no doubt,
or sports fandom in general. I think I've gotten the impression he's a little bit more calculated than, he's kind of developed this riverboat gambler type of roll the dice reputation with the 4th down calls. And the fact is, analytics in football are becoming bigger and bigger each year. And I would say, I don't know the exact metrics, but a heavy majority of the time, his 4th down decisions to go for it are supported by analytics. Like 70% of the time, you're going to get a 4th and 3 or a 4th and 4. Now, there are obviously exceptions, but yeah, I would agree. I think that he looks ahead to the future when it comes to it.
And I think, Chris, those analytics also don't always take into account how good your offense is.
Yes.
Those analytics don't always take into account, balancing your kicker making a 50-some-odd yard field goal versus Jared Goff and Amon-Ra and that O-line being able to convert, and David Montgomery and Gibbs and yada, yada. So I just think he balances that with his trust for his team. And believe me, that resonates with the guys too, how much trust he has in them.
Yeah. And it's very interesting because we talk a ton of baseball on my, on the show and on my Twitter page. And I'm a big proponent of baseball analytics. Football analytics, I'm very split on because I do believe in stuff like momentum. And the point that you just brought up, and even with all sports, it's insane to ignore the fact that humans still play the game. And that is a significant part of it. Like the whole going for, like what the Bucks did in the playoffs last year, the whole going for 2, because if you score again, then you're going to end up getting the ball back. But I don't like that. To me, momentum is still a thing, and people kind of ignore it. So it's interesting that you bring that up. You also brought up Jared Goff, who, and as much as people focus on Campbell, and I understand it, Goff to me has kind of turned into the ultimate, Detroit folk hero in a lot of ways, where he was by many people considered something of an afterthought, former number 1 pick, made a Super Bowl. He gets shipped to Detroit, really ends up turning his career around and earning a well-deserved extension. I'm just curious, as somebody who's been, around the team since he's been here, has Jared Goff, the quarterback, changed, or do you simply think he's gotten more weapons to play with?
I think that's a really good question because I want to respect what he did with the Rams, which included going to a Super Bowl. So I don't want to act as if all of a sudden he just got good because he's been good.
Right.
He may have reached a point where things didn't go well in the end in Los Angeles, and ultimately he was out of there. So I think to say that he's changed, I think somewhat takes that out of the equation. I don't want to do that. I will say, I think he just believes in Ben Johnson. Ben Johnson believes in him. This organization believes in him. This organization has shown him from day one, you're our guy. We're standing behind you. When everybody else was talking about bridge quarterback, when everybody else was talking about who are the Lions going to draft to replace Jared Goff, when everybody else was talking about the fact that the only reason he's here is because they got that second first-round pick, Brad Holmes, Ray Agnew, two guys that drafted him in Los Angeles, believed that he could be the guy. And Dan Campbell believed that he could be the guy. And that's what they have done. They have turned him into the guy. And the best case scenario for that trade was always that you did not need to spend a bunch of assets to go get a quarterback.
Right.
The best scenario for that trade was that Jared Goff was your quarterback. And I just think, man, I've just seen him endure so much here. You know, just imagine for a second what he went through, basically being booted out of LA, sent to Detroit, an organization that wasn't winning. You come in here, you're still not winning. It's miserable. But he just gutted it out and kept fighting and was a leader for this team. And I'm not trying to, you know, build it up into anything more than it was, but it's a great story. And it's taken a lot of perseverance and belief in himself and just fighting the whole way. And I got so much respect for the guy. And I know his teammates do as well. And I look, I'm just as an observer, I'm so proud of that guy for what he's done and the way that he has turned this franchise around as a quarterback. And obviously they always get a ton of credit, but you look at what he went through early, and the things that were being said about him, to be able to tune all that out, deal with the setbacks. You're losing. The team that traded you wins a Super Bowl, but you just keep grinding. Yeah, I just think it's a heck of a story. It's again, let's go back to this, Chris. Let's give some credit to the organization for sticking with him, for building around him, for giving him everything he needs to be a successful quarterback. Because I don't care who you are, you need guys around you to be successful. And they've figured out a way to do that. And I'm not diminishing his talent at all, because I think if you look at his record and what he did in LA and the playoff games he's won and what he did here, he needs respect for his ability and what he's done. And I'm glad to see that he's getting that now, because for a while, man, it was just like, well, they're winning in spite of, or they're winning because he's surrounded by so many weapons. No, Jared Goff has made plays to help this football team win.
I also think the whole, and we do this with multiple quarterbacks across the league. I remember hearing it with Purdy last year about how he's a product of his system. So, well, he plays in the system. And the fact is, like, I think we've learned in the NFL nowadays more than ever, just getting the quarterback is just one part of the equation. And I think what Brad Holmes has done a brilliant job of is they protect the guy. They've given him one of the best offensive lines in football, which is something they've rarely ever had here. And I think, when he arrived, I was rooting for him so hard because he seems like such a likable personality and a legitimately good leader and a good dude. And I think the way that he's thrived here, like, you go to a random Tigers game in May and you hear a Jared Goff chant nowadays. Like it's pretty good. Like, he's become aware of, he's played into it. I think it's fantastic. And I think the other thing you brought up too is in the NFL modern age, you can't deny the importance of a good play caller. And I think what Ben Johnson has done for him and his confidence is you can't say enough. And the fact that he's back for another go around is huge. Last year, obviously magical run for the Lions. First time you'd called playoff games before, but you had never called playoff games at Ford Field. Even with the high expectations, I mean, how blown away were you by the atmosphere at Ford Field?
I don't think I have the words, because it was so incredible. Hours before the game, you felt the electricity in the city. They opened the gates early, and that place filled up hour and a half before the game. And there was just so much emotion inside that building. And I'll be honest, I had so much emotion walking into that building that day. I wanted it so badly for the fans. And I've said this before, I've been in this business for 43 years, and I never wanted a player to win a game more than I wanted Jared Goff to win that game because of everything involved. And I just, the thought of walking out of there with 65,000 disappointed fans was a hard one. And to see that team win, to see that place blow up the way that it did, to see these fans get to enjoy it, to see fans crying, to see fans, just talking about how they're sharing this with their family, remembering people that weren't here and didn't make it with them to a playoff win, but shared so many Lions seasons with them before. There's just so many layers to it. And then just the advantage that you have when you have a building like that, and to see them come out and play well and win. And look, I mean, Chris, there've been times where Lions fans have had their hopes up before and they just took a gut punch. And this was a day that they just came out and delivered. I mean, Goff comes out and completes his first 10 straight passes. And, they make plays to win, winning plays. And you're watching guys do what they've done all year. And it was magical. And then to come back the next week and do it again, it was magical. But that's a special building when it's right. It really is. It's we've seen it before, the Chicago Monday night game, the Chargers game to clinch a playoff berth in 2011. We've seen it before, but that building, when the team delivers the product, is a special place. And we saw it that night. And I don't know how to put the appropriate words to it, but again, I've done this for a long time. I've done, a lot of championship games and championship events, and certainly Pistons eliminating the Lakers is up there for me as well. Been to a couple of Wings clinchers, but that one's right up there just in terms of what the fans felt, and maybe even more so because they hadn't felt it in so long.
Yeah, no, it was the loudest environment that I'd ever been to for a sporting event. I mean, it made me very happy the Lions play indoors, which that's just going to continue to help them. I think it's great. But also, what people forget is, yes, they play indoors, but you brought up the fact that people were tailgating and parked out there for hours before. It was 0 degrees both those weeks in Detroit. I mean, it was not, my producer and I were out filming some man on the street stuff. It was not ideal weather, and it wouldn't have mattered. It could have been a hurricane. It could have been a tornado. People were going to show up. It was, you got chills the entire time. And the only thing that I can in sports compare it to was like when the Cubs made their run to the World Series in 2016, and it felt like not only are there multiple generations of people who are experiencing this for the first time, but it kind of felt like the country was eyeing Detroit, which in sports over the last decade has been so rare. And the fact that they were able to embrace it as when you're in it and you're kind of living that whirlwind and you're focusing on the day-to-day, the game-to-game, were you able to take a step back and take in the moment and enjoy it for what it was during the entire process?
I think he did. It's hard sometimes because you are so wrapped up in it's Monday. I got to go do my coach interview. I got to sit down with Jared Goff as I do every Monday. It's Tuesday. I got to go tape my coach's segment for the TV show. It's Thursday. I got to do my player interview, my coordinator interview. So it's like you're so much in business mode. I will tell you, after that Rams game, my wife and daughter had gone to the game and they were staying downtown that night. And I went over and met them in a bar, restaurant. And it was just it was just such a cool moment because everybody there was in Honolulu blue. Yeah. And it was just this, I think that's, the stadium had been amazing, no doubt about it. But I think when I could exhale, drink a beer, hang with some Lions fans and just hear people's stories and talk to them. And that was, as much as the game was incredible, and it was, and that moment when you knew they had won it on the first down, Diamond Ra, there was also that moment after the game for me where it was just like, exhale, it happened, look how happy these fans are, and just kind of reveling in that moment. Because I've told people, and this will never change, the best part of my job is seeing fans happy. Mm-hmm. And I've seen so many fans over the years invest themselves and then, just be disappointed. And to see them be able to kind of reap the benefits of this over the last, year and a half or so, and take pride in being a Lions fan and get some payback for everything they've given this franchise means everything. And it makes my job just so much better. The conversations are better. People aren't yelling at you at the gas station about how to fix the team or at the restaurant or anything like that. So, I think it's sometimes hard when you're in it to take a moment, but I was able to certainly during that run and to understand it because it just seeing everything was about the fans, and it was so cool.
As awesome as it was in the stadium, I think the moment it sunk in for a lot of people, or at least for me, was stepping onto the streets of Detroit, like you kind of talked about, and seeing like this party's not going to end for a long time, and it shouldn't. Go ahead, enjoy it for as long as you possibly can. You've gone some of your clips, some of your calls with you kind of being filmed in the booth. We're going viral there, and I always like that stuff because to me, broadcasters, us as fans, even diehard fans, we have the luxury of turning off the TV if we get a little bit too tired of the product. You got to get through it all, and you've paid your dues here. You went through the 0-16 campaign. But these are some of the biggest moments of your broadcasting career. Do you go back and listen to your calls ever?
Oh, I do. Yeah. I mean, and I think there's value in that because you're your own worst critic. And you want to, go back over games. And I would say I don't go over them with the fine tooth comb that I used to. I used to just really grind on everything and then listen to them. And what do I like? What do I not like? What do I like? And I would, ask people that work with me that I know had to listen to the game because of what they do. Hey, where can I get better? What did you like? What did you not like? But yeah, those calls, those big ones, those moments, the stuff that's on video, I do go back and watch that. It's honestly, it's kind of a strange thing. I'm doing radio and there's a camera in the booth.
Yeah.
You don't think about it. You can't think about it. It's not a part of what I do on game day. It's just there. And then the guy you're seeing pumping his fist or getting excited is the same guy that you would have seen if there wasn't a camera in there. I can't stand still. I don't have the ability to do that. I am very active. I've told people before, there's been times where I have made a call, and sometimes when I make a call, I'll pound the desk and just for emphasis. And I've thought, oh my God, I broke my finger. It just goes numb. And then thankfully 10 minutes later, I was like, I can move it. It's not clicking. I should be okay. But, so yeah, I do watch it, more for the call it's changed so much in my 20 years because now those calls are on ESPN, NFL Network, SiriusXM. They live forever. So there's this feeling, don't blow it. Just don't blow it. Don't get it wrong. You just want to make sure that you get it right. And there's always things that I think you'd go back and maybe feel like you could have done better or done differently, but you just want to nail the facts, get it out, paint the picture, make sure the fans understand what's going on. I mean, you go back to that Rams game at the 2-minute warning, we went to break and Lions had a first down, 2 minutes to go. And I'm running the clock with the guys in my booth. I'm saying, okay, if they get a first down, this game's over, right? And we're doing it. I'm like, okay, run a play, timeout. Or they had no timeouts or whatever it was, 40 seconds. And I'm like, it's over. 40 and 40 is 120. That's 2 minutes. They get a first down, it's over. But you wanted to make sure. You had to know that if you say, okay, it's over, that it is in fact over. So once I saw that first down, I knew I could kind of just let go. It was done at that point. If they screw up a center snap and kneel, then I guess I'll have to make amends for that. But it was one of those things where, it's there is, I think that I do believe that's kind of changed over the years in that there is so much now where those plays get called everywhere. I think you want to get it right and you just don't want to screw it up. I mean, because that's what keeps you staring at the ceiling at night.
And that was going to be my next question you kind of brought up. Is it harder now with the internet being what it is and with, especially with the microscope being held up to the Lions and being as successful as they've been, to not be in your own head a little bit when a big call's coming up, regardless of whether or not it's going to be go well for the Lions either way, like, it's going to be a big moment.
Yeah, you can't overthink it. I mean, there's a certain amount of preparation that you have to have, which is, go back to figuring out the clock and making sure that you've got that down. But I have people ask me sometimes, do you write down the calls? And I've written down 2. in my time. The 0-16 I wrote down. And then when they broke the 19-game losing streak by beating Washington, I was kind of driving to the stadium that day, and I thought, they're going to win. And I thought, game, streak, nightmare. And I wrote those words down when I got to the booth, right at the top of the page. And it was like, game over, losing streak over, nightmare over. But you can't, and I've screwed it up before. And because I'll do a lot of calls when I'm driving in a car. I'll just talk to myself, and I'm doing things. And I was taught by a professor in college that when you're driving in the car, if you're a reporter, just start talking. Just pretend somebody just threw it to you and you're talking. I tell kids, young students all the time now, it's an invaluable tool, because the thing you have to be able to do in this business is talk.
Yeah.
And you're not always going to have a script. Sometimes people are just going to say go. And I still do that to this day. I've made NFC Championship calls, Super Bowl calls. I've made them all in my car just driving by myself. And the one thing that you can't do is just get so locked into something that the moment arrives and you've practiced something else, or you've written something else. And it's like, I'll go back to the Melifonwu interception to lock up the division last year. I had run through that so many times in my mind, but that wasn't ever on my bingo card, that they were going to win the division by an interception by Fatu Melifonwu, and that's going to do it. And I didn't love that call. I kind of felt like I had gotten in my own head a little bit before that. So I think it's important that you're prepared, but ready and flexible and able to react in the moment. That's why I think guys like, Joe Buck and the guys that are real, Tirico, the guys that are really the best in this business are the best in this business, because when the moment arrives, they always are there to answer it. And that's the biggest challenge, I think, for all of us doing this, is just being ready for the unexpected in the moment. And can you meet that?
Do you have a personal favorite call of yours?
I would say probably the end of the Rams game. I would say two of them come to mind. The end of the Rams game, for everything that it represented. And I felt good about the call when I heard it back. And then probably the Cliff Averill interception in 2011 against the Chargers that locked up the playoff berth. It was just kind of again, never see it coming moment, but there it is, pick six. And you're going to the playoffs, 3 years removed from an 0-16 team. And, it was a great day at Ford Field, and just a moment where you could just cut loose and let all the emotions come out. So those two probably come to mind. And it's not just the call you made, but it's the moment that they represent.
No. Turning the page here to this upcoming season, they're about to kick off, ironically, against the Rams to begin the season here. Who's a player on this roster that you feel like not enough people are talking about, that you think might have a breakout season in 2024?
I think Jack Campbell is one. I think Jack is somebody that really kind of figured it out towards the end of last year. And I think he is an incredible athlete for somebody that's 6'5", 250 something. And I just think the moment I saw them draft him and I saw his tape and knew what he could be, I thought he's the guy that's going to lead you in tackles next 4 or 5 years, and is good. And I do believe that's a guy that really easily, I said this the other day, could be a 135 tackle guy this year and just lead the team. I just think he's figured it out. They want him on the field. He can do everything. I think he's a guy that can take a massive, massive jump this year. And then I think the guy that can be the rocket fuel for this team, and people certainly are talking about him and haven't stopped talking about him, is J-Mo. Mm-hmm. I just think he is, you talk about somebody who still hasn't caught 25 passes in this league. And if he becomes that 60 to 85 catch guy with a full route tree, just getting the ball in his hands that many times, you're going to have some big, big plays. And for as good as this offense is, it opens up so much if he becomes the kind of player that I think we all believe he can be with the talent that he has, the speed that he has, the elusiveness that he has. So those are kind of two guys that come to mind for me. Look, there's a lot of talent on this team. So there's other guys that I think you could certainly talk about. But to me, offense and defense, those are two guys that I think could really kind of just take off this year.
I think both the Alabama boys have a chance of doing that. I think Gibbs, I think there's a Christian McCaffrey-like ceiling with him, with what he's able to do out of the backfield, both as a receiver. Now, you have the two running back system with him and Montgomery, but man, with his speed and kind of what we saw in the latter half of last season, because he didn't really get going until the Monday night game against the Raiders. I think there's something really special there. A few more questions, man. Just from a broadcaster's perspective, because I know that you've called football both on TV and on the radio, and I'm always curious because you hear about it a lot with baseball announcers, how they kind of prep differently, and you call a game differently when there's a visual element. Is there a different preparation for you in regards to how you call a game on television versus how you call it on the radio?
Well, I mean, just when I was calling games on TV, I was doing games for Fox, and essentially they're calling you up and telling you, okay, you're going to do Seattle and Arizona. And you're like, all right, I got to bone up on Seattle and Arizona. And the challenge is that it's going to those markets, those teams know, those fans know those players way better than you do. And that's why I think you get so much grief for, television announcers when they come through, is because they don't always understand the nuance of the team like the fans do. Mm-hmm. They haven't been there. You can say, this dude has had a nice year, and the fans are at home going, no, he has not. No, he is not. He has been terrible. He may have 68 tackles, but the dude has missed tackles. The dude has dropped interceptions, this and that. So it was always the challenge, and challenge equals hours. And it was hours and hours and hours of preparation and watching tape and reading clips and all that to get ready for him. The one thing you find out when you're doing one team every week is your preparation is just your work during the week. It's different. My preparation is talking to coaches, talking to players versus, trying to learn a team and now all of that has happened in the 8 games before you get there to do game 9. So it is different. You call it differently because you're cut right down the middle. I mean, the one thing that I've kind of found is if you're doing the Lions, you're always going to give credit to the other team if they make a play. But more often than not, it's okay. If something went right, what did the Lions do right? If something went wrong, what did the Lions do wrong? It kind of always comes back to your team. It's not to say that you don't study the other team, but I would say it's a fraction of what you used to put in when you had to play that thing right down the middle and you weren't the home team broadcaster.
Yeah. And I think it's in the age of social media as well, and even more so in the age of stuff like NFL Red Zone, everyone's eye test tells a different story about a player. Like you said, regardless of the on paper Football Reference performance could be great, but you've seen a guy drop a few passes or you've seen a guy drop a few tackles. It kind of changes your perception. This is what I hope last year was the beginning of a golden age of Lions football, and at the very least, the expectations and the hope that surrounds this organization is unlike anything that we've seen here in a long time. As someone who went through the worst of it, who's called a lot of stops and starts with teams that made the playoffs, came close to winning playoff games, then took steps backwards. Was there ever a moment for you as a broadcaster where you felt like this was never going to work, where pessimism just ran a little bit too rampant, or was it important to you to kind of always hold out that hope?
I think you got frustrated within certain regimes, but I think every new regime brought hope.
Yeah.
And I think, look, when Mariucci or Marinelli or whoever, Schwartz or Patricia or whoever was announced, let's go back to what we were talking about. These are charismatic guys. You have to be, because you're in that position. You don't get there without having the ability to stand in front of people and tell them what you're thinking, sell it, and motivate them. So you walk out of that press conference feeling like, okay, this dude's good. We're in good shape. So there was always hope. There was disappointment. But I knew this, Chris. I knew losing wasn't forever. It really was. And even before I said that and having the recognition of doing it now, you understood that it was just about finding the right people. The Lions were no different than every other team in the NFL. They were no different. You just had to find the right people to come in here and run it and do it the right way. And they found them. There's no curse. They weren't destined to lose. There was nothing that prevented them from being good other than bad decisions. And if you make enough bad decisions, you're going to be a bad team.
Yeah.
And if you make enough good decisions, suddenly you're going to look down and you're going to say, you know what, this roster is pretty daggone good and we're a good team. So they just needed to start making better decisions. And if that meant putting the right people in there, then you had to do it. So I always believed it was possible. I always knew that it was about that. Getting there was the adventure. Getting there was enduring like the fans did all of the tough Sundays. And look, I get that. And I feel for those fans and what they went through. But never did I doubt that it could happen because I knew everybody else is doing it at some point. Yeah. There's going to come a time where you're going to get this thing right. And they got it right.
On a long enough timeline, the impossible becomes very possible in the world of sports. I remember my junior year of college, I had a professor who was a huge baseball fan, and I brought him up earlier. It was the day after the Cubs won the World Series in 2016, and he said to me, "Look, I'll tell you something, man. If you would have told me in my lifetime the White Sox, the Red Sox, and the Cubs were all going to win the World Series, I would have thought I was going to live to be 200." Yeah. And internally, I'm going to think, well, means Lions are next, right? You know, I mean, it's kind of you live long enough, you can see some amazing things. So no, you're absolutely right. And I think just as a fan, and I've talked about this with the teams I root for, like, you have to hold out hope. The second that you let pessimism win on a fully, you lose the ability to enjoy the good things when they happen. And I think that last year, what made go ahead.
Everything. I love the word you used. Everything that brings us to sports is hope.
Yeah.
Everything that makes the offseason so incredible, whether it's baseball free agency, NBA draft, whatever it is based on hope. You're hoping the moves that your team makes will be the ones that turn it around for them. You're hoping the draft picks that they make will be the ones that they turn around for them. It's why we love this stuff. It's why we invest in this stuff. It's why the NFL is a 12-month league, because teams are constantly churning out trades, free agency, a combine. That could be our guy. That could be our guy. Everything is based on hope. And if you're right, if you lose that, which you never should, because at that point, you're just done. Mm-hmm. But everything that brings us back is based on hope. Even when the Lions were 0-8, 0-9, 0-10, you're hacked off that Sunday night. You come back on Monday, and you're still not happy. And then you start coming out of it, and you're thinking there's a game coming up this week. And even if they're 10-point underdogs, you start thinking, you know what? By Wednesday, if we do this and this and this, we can win this game. By Thursday, you start to believe it. By Friday, you're ready to go. And when the game kicks off on Sunday, you're thinking, all right, big underdogs, but if they can make a couple plays, you can win this game. And I do think that's the charm of the NFL, is the 7 days in between games. I think it's the buildup. It's that each game is an event, but it goes back to the word you used, which is hope. And that's everything that we have is based on that word. It's hope. Hope for that Sunday, hope for that season, hope for the next season, hope for the future, whatever it is. And that's what keeps us all coming back, because we hope that somewhere down the line, we're going to have that year.
Yeah. And I mean, I was been as skeptical about anybody about the Lions my entire lifetime. And it really was. I remember it was after they beat the Bucs last year. And Brad Holmes alluded to this as well, where I said, you know, this doesn't feel like some sort of Cinderella run. This is a good team. They have good players and they have a good coach. And it kind of changed my mindset of sports fandom of like, never say never, because they found the right people here. And as you said, decision-making is better than it's ever been. And there's a ton to look forward to. Regardless, there's no crystal ball that tells the future, but I am confident, regardless of where the team finishes, the broadcasting crew in Detroit will continue to do a wonderful job. And I really appreciate you doing this. Look, like I said at the beginning, we take our broadcasters very seriously in Michigan, in Detroit, through thick and thin. Dan, you've done a wonderful job covering this team and calling games for this team. And I think one of the coolest things about this run the last few years has been seeing the long overdue excitement and joy that the team has been able to bring you. And hopefully over the next several years, we get to see more of that.
Well, I appreciate that greatly. I'm blessed to do what I do. This organization has been amazing to me. I work, to work with the people that I've worked with over the years, to go to work with Brandy every Sunday, to go to work with Lomas and TJ every Sunday. I'm hanging out with people I want to hang out with, and I'm doing something that I love doing, that I dreamed about doing. So I'm I'm the luckiest guy in the world, and I'm so appreciative of everything that has happened to me here. And I'm taking this ride with the fans, man. So I just want to keep it going. It's been a blast. So I appreciate you having me, Chris. This was fun, and thank you very much.
Of course. And if you have a chance, check your schedule for the second weekend of February, and we can talk.
Oh, it's open.
Well, after the teams won the Super Bowl. Perfect. All right. Hold me to that.
And I've kept the next week open in case there's a parade. So I'm good. Yeah, I got nothing. My schedule is wide open for February. So I'm not counting on anything, but I'm not counting anything out.
It's always smart to plan ahead, my friend. So thank you very much. Yep. Thank you so much to Dan for hopping on. Shout out to Austin, who actually helped book this interview. What a nice, smart, just well-spoken dude Dan Miller is. And now that's not surprising. I know I hadn't interviewed him before, but you don't become an accomplished play-by-play guy, talking in bumper sticker slang. I mean, you need to be a relatively eloquent human being, but no, just a smart guy. I loved hearing him just talk about his experience as the broadcaster for the Lions. And just, I think what we love in Detroit, especially, it seems, is like there's a connection that we make with our broadcasters because we really get the impression they are also fans. And we feel like we've gone through the hardships with them. We've gone through the success with them. He's done a wonderful job. And by all accounts, a stand-up guy as well. Very easy guy to root for in an organization that has turned themselves into an easy organization to root for. Yeah, I mean, this is uncharted territory. You got to take things as they are. I try to keep arm's length with the Lions sometimes because with the exception of last year, they've pretty much continually let us down. But this is one of those instances where last year to me proved that this is different. And there's nothing wrong with embracing those expectations. And I think back to Michigan football over the last several years where I was kind of always a little bit gun shy to be like, well, I do think we're going to beat Ohio State. Well, I do think we can win the national championship. Like, you got to embrace these moments when they come because you never know when you're going to get them back. And I'm waxing poetic here, but it is true with sports. Like, very few sports seasons end with your team winning that final game. And whether that happens with the Lions this year or not, and we obviously hope it does, and we hope that we can have Dan back in February for a Lions Super Bowl interview show. But whether it does or not, these are expectations that fans of this team have wanted to have for decades. We've earned the right to potentially be disappointed. And I know how crazy that sounds, but the fact is there's been so many seasons that we've come into where expectations were so low, you couldn't even hurt our feelings, and yet people's feelings still ended up being hurt. That's how low they sunk. This is a completely different game, and it's a fun game. So we will be following along, and we will be having more Lions people, whether it's broadcasters, maybe players or coaches on the show at some point throughout the season. In season, it does get a little bit tough because, as Harbaugh used to say, they're in the submarine. They're focused on the day-to-day. Next week, we will have a fun interview lined up. We're going back to baseball talk, which, that's my bread and butter. I'd be crazy to deny that. Rob Friedman, a.k.a. the Pitching Ninja, will be joining us next week. If you're not familiar with him, you're definitely familiar with his work. You ever seen a GIF of Tarek Skubal throwing a nasty changeup? He probably posted it. So you've seen him on Ben Verlander's podcast as well. Fun interview. Looking forward to talking with him as we continue to kind of expand our platform here with Chris and company and with all Chris Castellani content. This will not be the last time I say this. I'm going to probably save my big speech for the end of baseball season, but this has been a uncertain time for me at points. And what has kept me going is two things. Number one, the GOAT, Austin Sisler, who continues to put in so much passion into this gig and helping me out and making me look way better than I have any right to look. But also just you guys, your responses and your support through this. Whether I'm talking to 100 people or 100,000 people, I think it's important to make that connection and to make that distinction. And I hope that I'm doing that and making all of you proud, because that's a goal. So thank you guys very much. You can follow me on Twitter at Castellani2014. Like this podcast, subscribe to this podcast, comment on this podcast. What's your prediction record for the Lions this season? All right, y'all. Thank you very much. Go Lions, beat the Rams. See you next week. Have a good one, everybody. Peace and happiness.